In scary movies, there's always that one moment. The chase, the panic, the victim just steps away from help when they're suddenly pulled back into danger. It's a trope meant to shock us and keep us on the edge of our seats. But in 1970, in a quiet Oregon town, that moment wasn't fiction, it was real. A young woman, terrified and desperate, made it all the way to the doorstep of help, only for her killer to catch up and drag her away. In the end, 2 people would be dead, no motive would be established, and all that would be left was puzzle pieces of other unsolved cases, West Coast serial killers, and 55 years of loved ones left behind without answers. I'm your host Megan, and each week on A Simpler Time True Crime, I cover older unsolved cases and challenge the idea that a simpler time means a safer time. This week, I'm bringing to you the unsolved murders of Julie and Terry Dade. It was around 4:20 a.m. on January 21st, 1970, when Jake Wacker and his wife both woke up and looked at each other. After taking a moment to orient themselves, they realized they couldn't both be dreaming. They were both hearing a woman screaming outside. The Wackers lived at 236 Southwest Laurel Street in Junction City, Oregon. Looking out to see what was going on, Jake Wacker noticed that the woman was at the front door of one of his neighbors, Mr. Don Bodker. Suddenly, Jake watched as a man came up and grabbed the woman and started dragging her away from the house as she continued screaming. At that same moment, a half-asleep Don Bodker opened his front door, also awoken by the noise. According to Wacker, Don Bodker asked the man if there was any trouble, and the man replied to him that the girl was just drunk. As the unidentified man got the woman into the street, she abruptly stopped screaming and he threw her into his vehicle, which was a white station wagon. According to Jake Wacker, the man then spent several minutes walking around with a flashlight, apparently looking for something in the street. After not finding what he was looking for, he got into the car with the woman and drove south. Minutes later, the man returned on foot, carrying his flashlight. He searched the street once more, except this time he picked something up, put it in his pocket, and walked away. The man was described as husky, medium height, wearing a heavy jacket and pants tucked into his boots. As so often happens in these older cold cases I share with you, the reporting on what happens next gets a little blurry because it's not clear if either Don Bodker or Jake Wacker called police. You have to remember that 911 wasn't yet established in Oregon, and it wouldn't be for another 11 years, so they would have had to call the local police station. Some reporting does indicate that at least one of them did, or another neighbor did that was alarmed by the screaming. Whether they did or not, they certainly came forward with the information they had after the next chain of events. First responders were called to the scene of a fire and explosion just blocks away at the Trailer Town Mobile Home Park, located between Highway 99 South and Prairie Road. The residents of that trailer park were awoken by the sound of an explosion at around 4:45 a.m. When they went outside to explore, they found a vehicle on fire underneath the carport at the residence of a man named Ferris Norman. He had been asleep in his trailer when the fire began, but then immediately ran outside. The neighbors rushed to summon firefighters while Ferris Norman grabbed his fire extinguisher and tried to douse the blaze. And when he got close enough, he noticed something far more sinister than just a car on fire. Underneath it, there was a woman's body burning. By the time firefighters arrived, the woman's body was badly burned beyond recognition, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. The vehicle that had been burning was a white 1962 station wagon. This scene was almost unbelievable to those investigating it. Don't be fooled by the city and its name, Because nestled between bigger cities like Eugene and Corvallis, Junction City was and still is a place with a small town feel. It had just 2,300 residents in 1970 and was known to be quiet and safe, so this was not a typical call for firefighters or police. As police began preliminary investigations, the unidentified woman's body was taken away for an autopsy, and in the meantime, they knew that the most important thing they had to do next was figure out who this woman was. She had no identification on her, and it was hard to even give a description of what she looked like because of how severely burned she was. So they started canvassing the nearby neighborhoods in Junction City to see if anybody had witnessed or seen or heard anything. They were able to connect with Don Botker and Jake Wacker at this point. And before long, they encountered a few people with the same story, that they had heard screams coming from the Maples apartment complex in the early morning hours. Now rest assured, I'll have maps for you on the Instagram page at simplertimecrimepod, but just to give you a better sense of the geographic layout of all of this, the Laurel Street location where the man and the woman were seen struggling, that is slightly more than a block south and east of the Maple Street apartment complex. And then going back to that Laurel Street location where the struggle was taking place, that is approximately 4 blocks south to get to the trailer park. So, like I said, I'll have maps, but it's not, all of this is fairly close together. Police made their way over to the apartment complex to go door to door. This complex still exists today under a slightly different name, and it's pretty small as far as complexes go, just a few buildings all close together with around 40 total units. As they talked to one neighborhood person, they learned that there was the sound of a baby crying pretty consistently from Unit 11. And as police approached, they got a feeling that something just wasn't right. They too heard a baby crying and saw that the front door was slightly ajar. Cautiously, they made entry and made their way to the first bedroom, where they made a horrible discovery. There was a man covered in blood, clearly dead, lying sprawled across the bed. Early reporting stated that this person had been shot in the face with an undetermined high-caliber weapon. Over in the second bedroom was the first sign of any good news the officers had encountered on this tragic Wednesday. There was a baby unharmed in his crib. Officers learned that the people on the lease for this apartment were 20-year-old Julie Dade and 19-year-old Terry Dade. They had just moved in with their infant son Mark about 6 weeks prior, and Mark had just celebrated his first birthday the day before. Before long, the victims at both scenes were confirmed to be Terry Dade in the apartment and Julie Dade blocks away at the trailer park. These beginning answers only gave way to more questions. Who were Julie and Terry Dade? Who targeted them that night? How did this evening play out? And why did it all happen? Julie Dade was born to Mr. and Mrs. Henry Thompson on August 8, 1949, and lived her early childhood in the community of Bonners Ferry, Idaho. Julie was the oldest, and she had a sister Annette who was 2 years younger than her, and a brother Henry James who was 4 years younger than her. The family moved to the city of Eugene, Oregon in 1962. She graduated from North Eugene High School in 1967 and was said to be very popular and well-liked. Along the way, she met Terry Lynn Dade. He was a year younger than Julie, born August 21, 1950, and he had spent his whole life in Junction City, one of 5 children. The couple married in 1968, and Julie gave birth to their son Mark in August of 1969. Since they had just moved into the complex recently, they didn't have much interaction with their neighbors, but the neighbors who police interviewed said that the couple was quiet and introverted and kept to themselves. Julie was a homemaker. She stayed home with the baby, and Terry worked the 3 to 11 shift at a place called American Can Company Plywood Mill. The preliminary autopsy on Julie revealed that she had been strangled and hit over the head with a large object. The killer had then placed her body underneath this vehicle in the carport, punctured the gasoline tank, likely with a screwdriver-type object, and then set fire to the fuel as it dripped onto Julie Dade. The autopsy indicated that Julie Dade was already dead when she was placed under the vehicle, but had been killed very recently. Terry's autopsy was surprising because remember when I told you he had been shot in the face? Well, that's what police initially thought because of how horrific his face looked. But as it turns out, he was beaten to death and bludgeoned with some sort of very heavy blunt object, none of which could be found at the crime scene itself. With the small town in a panic, investigators told the media and concerned community that they were dedicating full-time officers around the clock to the investigation, but that any piecing together of events and what happened would be only speculation at this point, so they wouldn't do it. Initially, the wife of a Lane County Sheriff's deputy who lived nearby cared for baby Mark while they tried to do notifications to the families. Soon, baby Mark would be in the custody of Julie's parents as they made their way down after hearing the most unimaginable and painful news any family could hear. The couple was laid to rest that Saturday the 24th in front of friends and family, and the funeral was conducted by the same minister who married the couple less than 2 years prior. One thing you've probably put together at this point is the station wagon connection. The witnesses to Julie Dade being forced into a vehicle stated it was a white station wagon, and the vehicle that belonged to Ferris Norman at the trailer park was also a white station wagon. So if you're like me, when I was first encountering this, I assumed this was probably or even likely the same station wagon because what are the odds? Well, apparently a lot higher back in 1970, way more so than 2025. Station wagons have been replaced by SUVs and crossovers in modern years, but this was a hot item at the time, and officers even described it as finding a needle in a haystack when talking about trying to locate the white station wagon. Plymouth, Chevy, and Ford all had their own variety of station wagons, and they accounted for 1 out of every 5 cars sold in 1970, with white being one of the most popular colors. Still, investigators said that the station wagon that was set on fire was not the same one that the perpetrator used to abduct Julie. Ferris Norman was said to have been awoken out of his sleep by the loud noise and was not the person who set the fire to his own vehicle. Now, I don't know what alibi was established or how Ferris Norman was investigated to corroborate his story, but I do know that Lane County said they had 10 to 15 officers working 16-hour days, interviewing, going through all the evidence, and they seemed to feel that Ferris's story was legit. And that's how it appears the investigators determined that they needed to look for a secondary white station wagon, the one that was actually used to abduct Julie. And as I bring up Ferris Norman here, I just want to be clear that I'm not trying to make him out to be a suspect at all. We know that eyewitnesses to the abduction saw the suspect for themselves twice. And according to the source material, police were bringing in potential suspects and having the eyewitnesses try to make an identification. So it would make a lot of sense that Ferris Norman was shown to the eyewitnesses early, and that was part of the way he was ruled out as well. In fact, in early reporting by the Oregonian, it was stated that authorities said they had no solid suspects, but had a tracer out on one automobile. The owner of the station wagon under which Mrs. Dade had been found was not connected to the case, officials said. My thought process led me in a slightly different direction. I was thinking, is it possible that Ferris Norman had nothing to do with the crime, but that his vehicle was used in this? I'm troubled by the fact that a white station wagon is seen abducting Julie Dade. Her body is then placed beneath a white station wagon that is then set on fire, and then the suspect is seen returning to the original abduction scene on foot minutes later. Oftentimes on this podcast, I talk about people keeping their doors unlocked, but also people have done things like leave keys under their seat or just sitting in their vehicle. It's not unheard of at all. And all of this took place in the middle of the night when most people were sleeping. The car was parked about 40 feet from the trailer, but it's hard to say if maybe the owner would have woken up or not. I can't say. Another thought was, did the suspect realize that he had been seen by witnesses in this station wagon and found another one to try to frame the owner of it? If so, I would still think he'd have to have a connection to that trailer park in some way, either as someone who lives there, which would be very risky, or someone who visits there and knew that there would be a white station wagon sitting there in the carport. Because this all happened in a pretty short period of time. 4:20 is when Julie shows up to the door of Don Botker screaming, and then at 4:45, that's when the explosion happens. No matter what, I believe the suspect returning on foot and the station wagon, it's all significant. As overwhelming of a task as it was, especially without computerized DMV databases, police did their best to track down station wagons. They did traffic stops and stopped at people's homes, and one person they were led to was a local homeless man living out of his white station wagon, and he was brought in and released due to the fact that witnesses were unable to identify him. And this was the case with a few others as well. Investigators painstakingly went over the crime scene to try to figure out what the series of events were, and here's what they believe happened that night. It was established that Terry Dade worked the 3 to 11 shift the evening prior. He arrived home, and the Dades probably went to bed sometime after midnight. Based on evidence found at the scene and information provided by the neighbors about the screams they heard, it's believed that Julie Dade opened the door to someone sometime between 2 and 3:30 a.m. and was immediately struck unconscious or at the very least stunned. Terry Dade was still asleep in bed and was likely bludgeoned to death with a heavy, blunt object just moments later. The suspect then abducted Julie Dade and kept her in his vehicle for some period of time. At around 4:20, blocks away from her home, Julie somehow got free from the station wagon and made a run for help. She made it all the way to the door, screaming, before she was pulled away. And then puzzlingly, she abruptly stopped screaming when she got dragged into the street, but before she reached the car. She then complied and stayed in the vehicle while the suspect searched around for something with a flashlight outside. The vehicle takes off. Julie is killed almost immediately after this, placed under the white station wagon at the trailer park. The suspect punctures the gas tank and lights the fire, which then leads to the explosion. The suspect then returns on foot, finds whatever it was he was looking for, and leaves. So with all of that established and said, there's just some bizarre things about this case, so I want to take a moment to go through what jumps out to me. First, let's talk about the start of this crime. I am surprised that Julie was the one to answer the door. And her answering the door, I think, is a huge key to this case. Loved ones were interviewed, and friends said that Julie was afraid to open the door to strangers and very safety conscious. This is also 1970, and Julie and Terry are taking on very traditional roles of him being the working provider and her being the stay-at-home housewife, and it struck me as odd that Julie would be the one to open the door. Did she know who was on the other side? Was she expecting this person? Had she been up with the baby recently and just happened to hear the knock at the door and then recognize the person? All questions we don't know, but I think are important. The next thing I wonder is, what was happening between the time Julie was brought to the car and then when she made that run for it? There seems to be, depending on when you think he showed up, because there's some sense that maybe it started closer to 2 a.m., some closer to 3:30, but it was very close proximity that she ran to that neighbor's house, and that wasn't until around 4:15 in the morning. So even if you're on the later end of it, that still leaves a pretty big gap. So was there a sexual assault? What was his end game here before Julie tried to run away? Because he hadn't taken her very far. The time gap is confusing, especially because once she did try to run, he killed her and disposed of her body very quickly. Another puzzling piece is the item in the street that the suspect was looking for. He risked coming back to the scene of the abduction where he knew he had already been seen, and he came back on foot to look for it again. And then he found whatever it was. It was small enough to throw in his pocket and important enough to take a big risk. It seems that it was either sentimental in nature or identifying in nature, and I personally lean towards the latter. At first, you could consider it was something like a driver's license, but I feel like it would have been pretty easy to spot that with a flashlight the first time around. But what about something like military dog tags? Small, easy to miss when you're searching for them with a flashlight on the street in the middle of the night, and possibly could have been broken and lost in the road during that physical altercation. They also would be extremely identifiable to the suspect, so definitely worth taking that risk for if you're the perpetrator. Another unanswered question is why Julie Dade suddenly stopped screaming in the road and then stayed in the car while he searched for items. Was he able to stun her in some way and then drag her back into the vehicle? That would explain how he overpowered her immediately upon going into her home too, if he was able to stun her, but then she came to at some point. Or also, did he threaten to harm baby Mark if she didn't stop, or if she tried to escape again, or make any more noise? A mother will do almost anything to protect her child. Lastly, for now, what does the killer returning to the scene on foot just moments later tell us? He either had to park his car nearby, but out of view, and then walk. And maybe he's doing that so that, because he already knows he's on the neighborhood radar, and maybe he doesn't want people seeing his license plates or something like that. Or it's possible he lived nearby and then returned on foot to the scene. Did he retreat back to his car or to his home? Where did he go? And those are all really important questions in identifying this man and his proximity to the Dade residence and where Julie was found. Detectives couldn't find any motive for the murder of this young couple. There didn't seem to be any enemies, any weird financial issues going on, and based on what's been released, nothing seems to indicate that there was any sort of extramarital affair. But the murders of these two seemed so brutal and personal. As leads died out, investigators grew frustrated. Chief Deputy Ron Eggleston said to the paper, quote, "We're burning up a lot of man-hours on the case." He also said they were trying to figure out whose work schedule might have put them in the area, but that was kind of grasping at straws and seemed to go nowhere. Rewards were offered for information, but nobody had any bites. Investigators had to consider, were there any other cases that shared similarities? And believe it or not, there were a couple. As always, I wanted to take a moment to thank you for tuning in this week, and I wanted to share something new I'm really excited about. I've created a new subscriber space where I can offer bonus content for those of you who'd like a little more. I've been thinking about it for a while and thinking about the stories I don't always get to tell in the main feed, such as solved cases that still fit the theme of this podcast, that the so-called good old days weren't always so good. Some of these cases changed the course of law enforcement. They shifted how we think about personal safety, or they've impacted the way society responds to danger. They're important stories too, and I've already started putting together a few I think you'll find interesting and that tie in, many of which you may have never even heard of. This space will also give me the flexibility to cover more recent cases or share other types of content I've been wanting to explore. If you'd like to support the podcast and get access to all that extra content, just click the link in the show notes that says Become a Supporter of this podcast. I'm just starting it now in August of 2025, but I'm looking to quickly build it up, and your support truly helps me keep doing this work, and I'm so grateful to have you here. Now, back to the show. I just want to warn you before I get into these cases that none of these seem like a total home run to me. They're all cases that have been discussed when Julie and Terry's case comes up, but there's nothing about them that stands out so much where you're like, yes, absolutely, these are connected. so just forewarning you. First, we have to back it up to November of 1963. High school sweethearts in Santa Barbara, California, 18-year-old Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards were enjoying a romantic night at the beach the night before graduation. The pair was seemingly ambushed, gunned down, and then set on fire. Their case has never been solved, and sometimes their names pop up on Zodiac Killer forums as a possible early victim of the Zodiac Killer. He was known to attack couples in romantic spots like lovers' lanes, and he even attacked a couple relaxing near the water at Lake Berryessa. The only thing that really has any overlap with Julie and Terry Dade is the fire aspect, so personally I think this one is a stretch, but I wanted to mention it. Jumping ahead a year after the Dade's homicide, a young woman was murdered at her place of work. Just as a content warning, this one gets a little graphic. In August of 1971, Jean Malicote worked as a receptionist for a company called the Regal Map Company, and earlier in the day, there was this man that was already harassing women in the area, and one woman was chased by him until she eluded him by running into another area business. A short while later, what is thought to be the same man that was terrorizing women in the neighborhood entered Miss Malicote's place of work, stabbed her over 100 times, doused her in flammable liquid, and set her on fire. This took place in San Jose, California, which is nowhere near Junction City. And again, beyond the fire, there aren't a lot of overlaps, but Lane County sheriffs actually have a link to the article about the Malicote homicide on their cold case website for the Dades. So I still felt it was important to mention it in case they found some additional connection that I'm just not privy to. And then as we move back closer geographically to Junction City, there are a couple that don't have the fire connection but do have some sort of proximity or other overlap. So in March of 1970, a 57-year-old woman named Maureen Mulvey was gunned down alongside her 27-year-old son, Charles Morse. They were sitting at a picnic table at Puma Creek Campground in Eugene. Because this was a double homicide, relatively nearby and close to the same time frame, it was briefly considered that it was connected to the Dade homicide. However, that next year, a 17-year-old named Charles Lawrence ended up pleading guilty to that case, and it was thought to be not connected anymore. So then, the last possible connecting case is one that took place in 1969 in Eugene, and that's the murder of Janet Shanahan, and I'll be honest, of all of them, this is the one that seems to have the most connection. It was spring of 1969. Janet Shanahan was 22 years old. Honestly, in her picture, she has a similar look to Julie Dade, in my opinion. I'll have pictures of her on my Instagram. And on that evening of April 21st, Janet went to her family's home in West Eugene to celebrate her brother's 15th birthday. But after the party, she never made it back to the apartment she shared with her husband Christopher near campus. Christopher claimed she never came home, and by the next day, Janet was officially reported missing. 2 days later, on April 23rd, a grim discovery was made. That morning, Christopher reached out to Janet's sister, asking her to help him drive around and look for Janet's car, a 1951 Plymouth sedan. And it didn't take very long. Within 10 minutes, they spotted the vehicle, partially in a ditch off Cross Street near Roosevelt Boulevard and Maple. And back then, that part of Eugene was an industrial zone, not somewhere you'd expect to find an abandoned car. But what they found next would be even more shocking. Christopher opened the trunk and found Janet's dead body in the trunk. She had been strangled to death. This is another unsolved case in the area. Over the years, detectives have continued to work the case, interviewing and re-interviewing people from Janet's life, and today, investigators are still working on it, and they believe that she knew the person responsible. But it's unsolved just like the Dade's case. Because of the strangulation, because of her similar appearance to Julie, and her being found in and around a vehicle, it seems similar to Julie's death at least a little bit. Still, we could just be grasping at straws. Julie and Terry Dade's murders have been cold for decades, but Junction City has still not given up on what is referred to as their most haunting cold case. Retired cold case detective David Solano has been revisiting the case and taking another shot at it alongside a team of other retired investigators. He said, quote, "We like to keep our eyes open and our blinders off and be open to any possibility because it could be something completely different than what we're thinking." In an interview with KOIN News for the 55th anniversary of the crime this year, Julie's brother Henry discussed the pain he still lives with. He told them, quote, "We had their wedding at the Christian church in Junction City, and 15 months later, after they said their vows and walked out, they were right back in there in caskets." Detective David Solano is open to possibilities. He told KOIN that it's possibly a person who had a mental illness who had become obsessed with Julie and was stalking her, and he added that sometimes it just takes a set of fresh eyes. Even though so much time has passed, it's hopeful to know that seasoned investigators are taking a new look and seeing what they can do differently after all of these years. And in the meantime, the families wait. Julie and Terry's parents have both died, and Julie's parents died only 6 years ago. They waited nearly 50 years for answers and went to their graves without them. But I'll end with a quote from Julie's brother. In thinking about his sister's final moments on Earth, Henry said, quote, "The fear that was in her gets to me. You know what I mean? She was running for her life. It just gets to me. I want her to know I'll never forget her." If you have any information on the unsolved murders of Julie and Terry Dade, please contact the Lane County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Team at 541-682-4513 and reference case number 70-0646. You can also contact their communication center at 541-682-4150 and then press 1. And you can also submit a confidential tip to soconfidential@lanecountyor.gov. This has been another episode of A Simpler Time True Crime. Your word-of-mouth recommendation of the podcast, social media engagement, and leaving 5-star reviews helps this podcast get discovered by new audiences so that these cold cases can be heard by more people. Please consider doing any or all of those things to show support, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll be back with another case next Monday.